It was the year 41 BCE. The Roman world was a cauldron of power, ambition, and suspicion. Julius Caesar had been assassinated only 2 years earlier, and the Republic, long teetering under the weight of corruption and civil war, was now a fractured entity. The triumvirate of power, Octavian, Lepidus, and Mark Antony, struggled to assert control over the remnants of Rome. But far from the marble halls of Rome, on the sun-drenched banks of the Nile, a queen waited. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt, had her eyes set not just on the survival of her kingdom, but on leaving a mark on history that no one could ignore. Cleopatra was no ordinary ruler. To the Romans, she was exotic, dangerous, and intoxicatingly intelligent. Her reputation preceded her, a woman of unparalleled wit, beauty, and political cunning. She spoke multiple languages, commanded armies, and navigated the treacherous waters of Egyptian politics, with a deftness that few could match. She had already survived the deadly intrigues of her own family, including a civil war that claimed the lives of her siblings. In a world where women were often pawns in male power struggles, Cleopatra was a queen who refused to be won. Mark Antony, on the other hand, was a Roman general of unmatched ferocity and charisma. He was Caesar's trusted lieutenant, a man whose courage in battle was legendary, and whose ambition rivaled the greatest men in Roman history. Antony was not just a soldier, he was a political operator, a man of strategy and seduction, capable of inspiring loyalty in his troops and fear in his enemies. His reputation in Rome was formidable, yet he was a man of appetites, passion, indulgence, and the pursuit of glory were as integral to him as the sword he wielded. So how did these two figures, seemingly from worlds apart, come to meet? History tells us it began with strategy as much as with fate. After Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, Antony found himself in the east, attempting to secure Rome's influence over Egypt, a kingdom both wealthy and politically delicate. Cleopatra, aware of Rome's expanding shadow, knew that the survival of her throne depended on alliances, and none would be more critical than with Mark Antony. The first encounter is one of history's most famous acts of political theater. Cleopatra, understanding the power of spectacle, arranged to meet Antony, not in a formal audience hall or under the cold scrutiny of Roman protocol, but aboard a ship. She wrapped herself in a carpet, some accounts say it was a rug, others a luxurious tapestry, and had herself smuggled into Antony's presence. When the carpet was unfurled, there she was, the Queen of Egypt, brilliant, audacious, and commanding. It was more than a simple meeting, it was a performance. Cleopatra's entry was a message. I am powerful, I am intelligent, and I will not be intimidated by Rome. Antony, a man accustomed to bold gestures, could not have been unmoved. He saw not just a beautiful woman, but a ruler of immense intelligence and capability. The stage was set for a relationship that would intertwine love, ambition, and politics, in ways the ancient world had never witnessed. Yet, it is important to understand that this was not a mere fairy tale of passion at first sight. Their alliance was rooted in mutual benefit. Antony needed Egypt's wealth to fund his military campaigns, and to secure his political position against Octavian, the future Augustus. Cleopatra needed Roman support to solidify her throne, protect her kingdom, and expand her influence. Their meeting, therefore, was as much a chess move in the game of empires as it was the beginning of a legendary romance. Stories from the time, particularly those preserved by Plutarch and later historians, emphasize that Antony was captivated. But it was Cleopatra's intelligence, her command of strategy, and her understanding of power that truly held him. She could discuss governance, military tactics, and diplomacy with the skill of a seasoned Roman general, and yet she also understood the subtleties of charm and seduction. This combination was irresistible to Antony, whose own personality was a blend of courage and indulgence. It's fascinating to consider the psychological dynamics at play here. Antony was a man who thrived on challenge and conquest, yet Cleopatra presented a different kind of challenge, not of arms, but of mind and influence. She did not submit, she negotiated, maneuvered, and commanded. The Roman general, accustomed to the dominance of men and the hierarchy of military command, found himself in uncharted territory. A partnership with a woman who was his equal in intellect, his match in cunning, and his mirror in ambition. Their union, when it became public, sent ripples through both Rome and Alexandria. In Alexandria, Cleopatra's court became a hub of intrigue and fascination, filled with Roman advisors, soldiers, and diplomats. In Rome, whispers began to circulate. Antony had been seduced, not just by a woman, but by the wealth, exoticism, and political power she represented. Senators and citizens alike debated the dangers of a Roman general entangled with a foreign queen. It was a scandal that promised to reshape the political landscape. Yet despite the political stakes, the personal element cannot be ignored. Cleopatra and Antony's relationship was infused with passion. Historical accounts describe their shared meals, feasts, and celebrations, a world of indulgence where power and pleasure were intertwined. Cleopatra's legendary beauty, often exaggerated by later historians, was complemented by her presence, intellect, and charisma. Antony, a man of grand gestures himself, responded in kind, lavish gifts, military support, and personal loyalty that blurred the lines between political necessity and romantic devotion. But even at this early stage, tension was inevitable. Antony was a Roman, bound by the expectations and scrutiny of his fellow leaders. Cleopatra was a foreign queen, whose allegiance could never be taken for granted. Their alliance required constant negotiation, both politically and personally. The seeds of conflict, of jealousy, and of betrayal, both perceived and real, were already planted, even in the honeymoon of their partnership. History often paints Antony and Cleopatra as reckless lovers. Two individuals consumed by passion, blinded by desire, and drunk on power. But the truth is far more complicated, far more political, and far more human. Their love wasn't simply a scandal, it was an alliance born from necessity, strengthened by survival, and sealed by the shared fear of a rising power that threatened them both. By the time Mark Antony made Alexandria his second home, he wasn't merely a Roman general seeking comfort. He was a man cornered by politics, hunted by ambition, and trapped between loyalty to Rome and loyalty to his heart. And Cleopatra? She wasn't just a queen seeking romance. She was a strategist, someone who had already survived betrayal by her siblings, invasion by Julius Caesar, and the cutthroat politics of the ancient world. She understood something Antony didn't. Rome does not share power. Rome consumes it. When Antony arrived in Alexandria, he entered a world completely different from Rome. Rome was stone, discipline, and sharp edges. Alexandria was color, philosophy, and luxury. Rome marched, Alexandria danced. When Antony stepped into Cleopatra's palace, he found a world tailored with intention. Polished floors that reflected torchlight like water. Musicians who played softly behind silk curtains. Servants trained to move like shadows. And Cleopatra herself, calm, poised, radiant, and impossibly confident. She knew exactly how to command a room. Not with loudness, not with force, but with the quiet certainty of someone who has already calculated every outcome. Antony had faced armies. He had led legions. He had conquered nations. But Cleopatra? She conquered minds. And Antony was no exception. Power meets power. People often reduce their relationship to seduction. But both were already parents, rulers, and battle-hardened survivors. They were not naive teenagers swept away by emotion. They were a queen fighting for the survival of her dynasty, a Roman general trying to secure his legacy. Two figures standing at crossroads of history. Cleopatra needed Antony's military strength. Antony needed Cleopatra's wealth. But what they didn't expect was the emotional connection that followed. Cleopatra challenged him. Antony made her laugh. She understood politics the way he understood war. He admired her intelligence in a way few ever had. And so a partnership began, one that balanced strategy with sincerity. Their nights became legend. Historical texts describe their nights as wild, extravagant, even unbelievable. But beneath the wine, the games, the feasts, and the river cruises stood something deeper. They formed a private society known as the Inimitable Livers, where they dined together, played together, and debated philosophy into the night. Antony, usually stiff and militaristic, softened in Egypt. He dropped the Roman mask. He became human. Cleopatra stopped being just a queen. She became a woman who laughed freely again. To the outside world, their nights looked like sin. But to them, it was escape. Rome judged them. Egypt adored them. History misunderstood them. But in those quiet moments away from politics, they were simply Mark and Cleopatra. Not general and queen. Not Roman and Egyptian. Not symbols of power. Just two people seeking refuge in each other. Their union produced 3 children, Alexander Aelios, Cleopatra Selene, and Ptolemy Philadelphus. Antony publicly recognized them, which was unheard of for a Roman statesman. And by doing so, he sent a message. Cleopatra envisioned their children ruling a new empire, an Egyptian revival, a kingdom powerful enough to stand beside Rome, instead of trembling beneath it. Antony gave them territories. Cleopatra gave them lineage. Together, they carved out a future Rome could not ignore. But Rome did not see this as politics. Rome saw betrayal. Particularly one Roman, Octavian, later known as Augustus. Octavian was not a warrior like Antony. He wasn't charismatic, wasn't charming, wasn't a battlefield legend. But he was lethal in a different way. He was patient. He was calculating. He was merciless with propaganda. Octavian feared Cleopatra, not because she was exotic, but because she was powerful. She had wealth, fleets, armies, and influence over one of the last great surviving generals of Rome. So Octavian weaponized the one thing Romans feared most: the destruction of Rome from within. He painted Antony not as a general, but as a man bewitched by an Eastern temptress. He claimed Antony had given away Roman land. He said Antony was abandoning Rome. He insisted Cleopatra wanted to rule Rome through seduction. Rome, already suspicious of luxury and Eastern culture, believed him. He read Antony's private will, stolen, before the Roman Senate. In it, Antony requested to be buried in Alexandria beside Cleopatra. To Romans, this wasn't just betrayal. It was treason. It was unforgivable. And now, Antony and Cleopatra had a new identity forced upon them. Enemies of Rome. The moment Octavian declared war on Cleopatra, not Antony, he revealed his strategy. He didn't want to fight a Roman hero. He wanted to fight a foreign queen. Rome would follow him. Legions would rally. The public would applaud. Antony stood with Cleopatra openly. He chose her army. He chose her land. He chose her people. Some say love blinded him. Others say loyalty guided him. But one truth is certain. Antony and Cleopatra didn't fall into tragedy by chance. They walked into it together, knowing the risks, knowing the odds, and knowing that Rome would never forgive them. This was no longer a romance. This was a rebellion. A war disguised as love. A love disguised as war. The world held its breath. As their fleets prepared for battle and their armies gathered along the coast, whispers traveled across the ancient world. Could Cleopatra and Antony actually win? Egypt was wealthy. Antony was experienced. Their combined forces were formidable. But Octavian had something far more dangerous: a united Rome, and the world's greatest propaganda machine. Antony and Cleopatra had love, vision, and courage. But Octavian had timing, strategy, and the ruthless patience of a man ready to reshape history. The stage was set. Lines were drawn. Empires braced for impact. And somewhere between the politics and the passion, Antony and Cleopatra realized the truth. Their love had grown too big, too powerful, too influential. Rome wouldn't tolerate it. The world wouldn't forget it. And the weight of their choices began to tighten like a noose. The love of Antony and Cleopatra had survived scandal, politics, and the sharpest blades of Roman propaganda, but what they were about to face would test not only their devotion, but their very identities. It began at Actium, a place that would become the graveyard of their dreams. On the morning of the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, the sea looked deceptively calm. But beneath that surface lay the shifting tides of three empires: Rome, Egypt, and the fragile alliance of Antony and Cleopatra. Antony believed experience could overcome circumstance. Cleopatra believed strategy could outweigh Roman numbers. And together, they believed that love could endure war. But the world had changed. Rome was no longer divided. Octavian had unified every legion under a single cause: destroy Cleopatra. Destroy Antony. Secure Rome forever. When the battle began, Antony's ships struggled against the swift Roman fleet. The winds betrayed him. The sea resisted him. And Octavian's admiral, Agrippa, brilliant, patient, deadly, tightened the noose. The moment Cleopatra saw the battle tipping toward disaster, she made a decision that historians still debate. She fled the battlefield. Some say she panicked. Others say she acted strategically, protecting the treasury aboard her flagship. And some believe she knew that if she fell into Roman hands, Egypt was lost forever. Antony saw her ship turning away. And in that instant, something inside him broke. He abandoned the battle. He pursued her. He chose her, again, over victory. Rome never forgave him. History never forgot him. That single moment became the symbol of Antony's fall. But to him, it was simple. Without Cleopatra, there was no victory worth fighting for. After Actium, they retreated to Alexandria, once a city of music, laughter, and wealth, now a city waiting for the storm. Their palace, once filled with celebrations, now held silence heavy enough to crush the heart. The fountain still flowed, the walls still glowed with gold, but everything felt like a memory of glory rather than glory itself. Antony grew depressed, no longer the fierce Roman general, but a man wrestling with the weight of his decisions. He trained soldiers during the day, but at night, he sat in the shadows, staring into the empty distance. Cleopatra tried to lift him. She organized feasts, revived their society of the inimitable livers, and attempted to restore the spark they once shared. But the world had moved past them. Rome was coming. Not in whispers. Not in threats. But in legions. Full power. Full fury. Full determination to end the dynasty of Egypt. By the summer of 30 BCE, Octavian's army surrounded Alexandria. The desert burned with heat, but Antony's heart burned hotter, with pride, regret, and a refusal to surrender. He made one last stand. And for a brief moment, he won. His forces pushed back Octavian's cavalry. His men cheered his name. It was as if the old Antony had returned, the Roman hero, the undefeated general, the titan of the battlefield. But victory was illusion. Octavian's reinforcements arrived. The city was overrun. The palace was breached. And Antony was left with the one truth he had been avoiding. The end had come. In the chaos of battle, Cleopatra retreated to her mausoleum, a grand stone chamber she had constructed for herself long before, decorated with gold, jewels, and symbols of rebirth. She locked herself inside and sent a message to Antony. "I am dead." It was not true. But Cleopatra understood something Antony did not. He would never leave Alexandria alive if she lived. His loyalty to her was both his strength and his downfall. But maybe, just maybe, her death would free him to do what she could not: save himself. The message reached Antony like a blade. He did not cry. He did not shout. He simply whispered, "Not without her." Then he did the only thing a Roman general knew how to do when honor slipped through his fingers. He chose his own death. He fell on his sword. But death did not come quickly. He lay bleeding, slipping between consciousness and agony, until one of his loyal soldiers lifted him and carried him to the mausoleum, where Cleopatra, alive and desperate, waited behind sealed doors. She ordered her servants to lower Antony through a window using ropes. And so the greatest Roman general of his era, the man who had stood beside Caesar, who had commanded legions, who had shaken empires, was pulled into her arms like a broken child. His blood stained her clothes. His breath warmed her cheek. His voice trembled as he whispered the last words he would ever speak. "I died honorably, for you." Cleopatra kissed him. And in that moment, Rome didn't exist. War didn't exist. Defeat didn't exist. Only two lovers existed. Together. At the very end. Antony died in her arms. And Cleopatra knew that there was no world left for her. Octavian arrived days later. He expected chaos, surrender, panic. But Cleopatra stood tall. Her hair was styled. Her crown was polished. Her gaze, steady. She greeted him not as a conquered queen, but as a woman who had already chosen her fate. Octavian threatened her. He promised humiliation. He planned to parade her in chains through Rome. A spectacle of Roman power and Egyptian defeat. But Cleopatra would not give Rome that pleasure. She negotiated. She pleaded for the throne of her children. But inside her heart, she already knew her path. Cleopatra had been trained her entire life in the art of endings. Kings of her dynasty died on their own terms. Queens followed the tradition. And so, she arranged her final act. In her mausoleum, a chamber filled with gold, perfume, and symbols of eternity, Cleopatra dressed in her finest royal garments. She wore the crown of the Ptolemies, lined her eyes with kohl, and surrounded herself with the royal insignia of Egypt. She sat on her golden throne. She asked for a basket containing figs. Inside the basket, hidden beneath the fruit, was the instrument of her final freedom. A venomous asp. Some say the snake bit her arm. Some say it bit her breast. Others say she applied poison by hand. History cannot agree. But the result was the same. The Queen of Egypt died as she lived, in control of her fate. When Octavian entered the room, Cleopatra's body was already cold. Her two servants lay beside her, having also chosen death over Roman humiliation. Octavian stood in silence. He didn't celebrate. He didn't smile. He simply stared. Because in that moment, he realized the truth. He had won the war. But she had won the ending. Cleopatra's children were taken to Rome. Rome absorbed Egypt. Antony and Cleopatra's dream of a shared empire dissolved into dust. But their story, that lived on. It survived through poets, historians, playwrights, and emperors. It became a symbol of love, power, rebellion, and fate. It became a warning to rulers and a fascination to lovers. It became one of the greatest romances in human history. Because in a world ruled by empires, laws, armies, and politics, two people dared to choose each other. Even when it destroyed them. Even when it rewrote history. Even when it ended in tragedy. Their love was not perfect. It was not gentle. It was not simple. But it was real. And it was powerful enough to shake Rome. And that is why their story is still told today, even after 2,000 years. Cleopatra and Mark Antony remind us of one truth. Some loves burn so brightly, even empires cannot extinguish them.